David Reese asks, how comfortable are you as center? Personally, Cody Whitehair and Lucas Patrick seem like above average options and provide good depth. I'm so glad David asked this question because I feel like I've started to see Bears fans going off the rails in their conversations about center over the last couple months on Twitter, forums, and everywhere else, and it's worth a breakdown. So let's talk through three things today. We're going to talk through what center is in the NFL and how teams treat the position. We're going to talk about Cody Whitehair, his strengths and weaknesses, and we'll talk about Sam Mustipher while we're at it because that's what the Bears are moving on from to get a holistic sense of where the Bears are at center, and hopefully, David, answer your question as we go. So first, let's quickly talk about what center is, does, and how the NFL addresses this position in terms of resources. Center, as many offensive line coaches will tell you, is, if not one of the most important positions on your offensive line, and that's because of the mental work these guys do. They're the ones who work with the quarterback to identify the Mike linebacker, set your protection scheme, meaning they set who's blocking who, identify what blitz threats are coming, and how they're going to handle them, and all of the other mental related work that the offensive line does. The center is the leader for that. In effect, yes, it's corny, but the center is the quarterback of the offensive line. But because the position is so intangible, generally you see teams address center in one of only two ways. They either spend big on the position because they have a difference maker, like the Chiefs did as they drafted Creed Humphrey, the Eagles did in extending Jason Kelce, the Ravens did in drafting Tyler Linderbaum, and the Jets and the Giants recently in drafting Joe Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz. These teams are hoping that their center becomes one of the cornerstones of their offensive line and is able to take them from where they are to major steps forward. These guys are awesome. What they can do in the run game is something that guys in the day 3 and UDFA zone really just can't do. Physical attributes that you can't teach anywhere else, and Joe Tippmann, Tyler Linderbaum, Kelce are some of my favorite centers for that very reason. They expand your playbook. And if that doesn't have your mouth dripping with what you could do in a run game, I don't know what will. But that's only one of the ways that teams handle center. The other way is to spend next to nothing on it. We're talking about what the Bears have done with Sam Mustipher, what the Ravens did for years with Bradley Bozeman, a 7th round pick. I mean, you see all kinds of centers across the NFL that come from the later reaches of the draft, and when you look from a big data perspective, that's a valid way to treat this position because the NFL finds many more starters on day 3 at center than they do at most other positions in the NFL, let alone the rest of the offensive line, where you find next to none at tackle and some at guard, but certainly not as many as you find at center. So in effect, the NFL sees this as a studs and duds position, that if you can handle the mental piece of center, they'll figure out what you can and can't do physically later, as, after all, when you look at what a center schematically does, most of the time, they're involved with the double team. Think about it. There's 5 offensive linemen, and in a 4 down front, there's 4 defensive linemen. There's a double team somewhere, and usually one of the guards gets help from the center. You have seen this your entire football life, but it's one of the reasons that since a center isn't going to have to take on guys one-on-one, isn't going to have to do the work that guards have to do in displacing people in the run game, as often they peel off a double team and head up to the second level, or since they don't have to face Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, and other warriors in the pass game on the edge like a tackle does, many teams will just take whatever the best player they can find at center for next to nothing and work their offensive line from there. But if in your choice between a stud and a dud, you choose the dud like the Bears have done with cheap Sam Mustipher over the last couple years, you run the risk of encountering the same problems the Bears have over the last couple years, which is that whenever Sam Mustipher ends up one-on-one with an impact defensive lineman, he is almost unilaterally going to lose. And as we saw in some of these cases against Dexter Lawrence and Kenny Clark in particular, he's going to lose in pretty astounding fashion and give your quarterback in Justin Fields next to no chance to succeed, because with interior pressure coming this quick and this emphatically, there's not many passing concepts that you're going to be able to run effectively, and in the case of Justin Fields, moving too far to the left or right is going to take you into the path of the edge rusher that's trying to sack you anyways and create even more problems. That's why interior pressure is so damaging. It's the reason that Akeem Hicks, Aaron Donald, Vita Vea, Chris Jones, and so many other interior rushers have dominated the NFL like they have. And if you don't have the physical tools to compete with these guys, there's just not much you can do. Enter Cody Whitehair, who the Bears have now moved over from left guard to center. He's taking all his preseason reps at center so far and looks to be the next center for the Chicago Bears. He's 31 years old, he's got a long and colorful injury history, but let's break him down real quick because I think he's closer to one of those studs at center if he can stay healthy than I think some people realize, just because, like we've talked about, the bar at center is so doggone low. Cody Whitehair possesses a very explosive lower body that not only lets him move well, but lets him anchor and use his core against strong defensive tackles to move them as a guard and play stout against the pass. His testing numbers from when he was 24 corroborate this too, with 85th and 90th percentile explosive numbers, 3 cones, 10-yard split, 40-yard dash. He clearly has a powerful lower body, and while he's a 31-year-old man now, that's still the hallmark of his game. This lets him play a very pure version of offensive line, where he generates his power from his lower half and translates it into his upper half, as opposed to guys like Mustipher, we'll get to him later, who are forced to lean and press with their upper half because they don't have the lower body to generate power with. As he's aged, he's also improved his striking, and you'll see him lock and latch very well, using those relatively large hands to grab onto defensive linemen and hold them in place on both run and passing downs, which really fits the Bears' wide zone scheme. There's also some implied versatility with Whitehair that I really like, where if somebody gets hurt, like Tevin Jenkins, who's yet to finish a full season as a pro, Whitehair could feasibly kick over to guard and Lucas Patrick could insert himself at center. And while I'm not crazy high on Lucas Patrick, having 2 guys that can reasonably play all 3 spots on the inside is really nice for a Bears team that can use all the depth it can get. Now, I don't want to be coy about Whitehair's injury because he suffered a knee injury in week 4 that in December got described as significant when he re-aggravated it. So a lower body injury to a lower body player is not a good thing. But I love veterancy in centers, and Cody, who's been in the league for an awfully long time now, should be able to identify pressures quickly and move to stop them along with the rest of the offensive line. Also, maybe I'm being too hopeful, but late in the season, I'm talking when you probably checked out too, weeks 17 and 18, Whitehair played some of his best games back from injury, which make me wonder, maybe he really is healthy, but we won't know until we see him in training camp, and for now, I'll just assume he is, because I would hope that Ryan Poles would have added another center if he wasn't. Also, don't get me started on too much optimism, but maybe Cody Whitehair, whose only real flaw in his body is that he's got very short arms that get him out leveraged on occasion, is going to have an easier time at center, who's closer to that initial engagement with his defensive tackle, but at least we already know he can control his losses and allow Justin Fields to escape even when he takes an L. The main thing to remember here is that I see the Bears as going from a replacement level center to a center with at least some physical upside, which I think is a bigger upgrade than some are giving it credit for, but you're only going to see that if we break down Sam Mustipher, so bear with me, let's talk about Sam. Look, on my old YouTube channel, I used to dog on Sam Mustipher almost weekly. The guy doesn't deserve it. He's a UDFA. There's only so much that a guy like him can do, especially, again, with the RAS numbers that we talked about earlier. After all, when you test this poorly, how are you supposed to stand up to the first and second round defensive linemen bearing down on him? Of course, these physical matchups went the way they did. But fair or not, he's been starting for the Bears over the last 2 years. So in situations where he's been massively overpowered or hopelessly outgunned, the Bears have lost key downs and key offensive gains throughout the years because of the mismatch that they're offering at center against a team with a player that can punish him. The biggest problem for Sam Mustipher is that football, in secret, is not a fair game. So when Sam can't generate that power from his lower body, he has to lean into the guy in front of him like we've seen, and that creates a leverage mismatch that really strong players take advantage of. He's also not somebody that's going to ever dig out a defensive lineman one-on-one, so if his guard misplays a snap, the snap is over as soon as it's all on Sam to make a play. Honestly, kudos to Sam for getting as far in the NFL as he has. He is a backup for a reason rather than out of the league, which is the fate of most UDFAs. But when he needs a physical tool to get out of a jam, he just doesn't have one to lean on, and that makes him a better backup than a starter, certainly. I can't emphasize enough. Sam Mustipher, the person, I'm sure he's great. Sam Mustipher, the player, I'm happy to see him in Baltimore, and I think it's frankly good for him that he finally gets to be a reserve center because it was never fair that he was the heir apparent in Chicago. But overall, I'm pretty upbeat about what a tandem of Cody Whitehair and Lucas Patrick can do. It's not that I'm stoked about Lucas Patrick, a UDFA in his own right, but at least he's the center 2 as opposed to the center 1, and the Bears' current center 1 has a lot of that explosion that we talked about in his breakdown that he should be able to offer the Bears at center. This is probably the twilight of Whitehair's career. I don't think he's any more than a one-year solution where maybe if he really pops off and stays healthy for 17 games, the Bears will offer him a pretty minor extension. But his contract is so hefty, I can understand why the Bears, yes, they have the option to post-June 1st him, but the savings aren't so emphatic that you have to make that move, especially when you remember he's a guy that already knows the offense, and not having to reteach your center, remember, the quarterback of that offensive line, and allow him to just slide right over and make the calls that he had to learn while in the offensive line rooms and working with the offensive line last year. I think this is a net win for the Bears. We don't need to be hyperbolic. It's not that I think Whitehair is an amazing player in the prime of his career that's about to take center and make it a plus point for Chicago, but they're moving from a player that wasn't very good and at his best was invisible to a player that actually should be able to move a little bit in the run game. You could probably run a little bit of center pull action because you've been pulling Cody Whitehair as a guard for long enough, and at least imitate what you would have done had you been able to draft a Ricky Stromberg or a Joe Tippmann that it wouldn't surprise me if the Bears did have their eye on in the draft. If Whitehair can stay healthy, and that is a big, big if, I tend to think that his veteran presence will be a real boon for Tevin Jenkins on his left and Nate Davis sliding over from another team on his right, and that confidence should bleed to the tackles, who are as young as they are for a reason. If the Bears can keep that interior clean, Justin Fields will have room to step up in the pocket and escape out if he needs to, and I think that'll be a big boon for the offense. But anyways, that's just my take on the matter. What do you think? Would you have rather the Bears added another center? Would you rather add somebody like Chase Roulier that's out there right now? Do you want to see the Bears address center before preseason? Let me know in the comments below. I'm all ears about what you guys think about formats just like this. Again, bigger breakdowns like the Jordan Love one I mentioned last week are coming. I'm working on it as we go, but we're gonna find our balance on this new YouTube channel little by little. My goal is to deliver you quality content with at least some consistency. Right now I'm thinking Tuesdays and Fridays, but we'll see how the schedule evolves. Until then, follow me on Twitter. I'm posting daily on TikTok while I'm at it. We'll be here on YouTube, and until next time, Bears fans, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with me.